backgrounds are so bright. I'm in a Dungeness hospital right now.
Yeah, you picked the wrong spot.
Well, tell this so I can get some tropical frogs in my background.
I didn't want to have the ladder in my background like I usually do when I'm at the job site. So
Jimmy likes the ladder though, Brian. He's all
does.
He loves that.
He does.
Likes the ladder.
You know, we do work for a construction company, so
Right. Make sure you get the ladder in Brian's photo picture. That's what he's always telling me anyway.
Hey, Brian, how you doing? John Hoffman, TK Elevator. Seen your
Hey,
name
John.
for years and years. How many years you got in this business now?
do I?
Yeah.
Last I checked, about 38.
You got me
There
by
you
2
go.
years. Shoot. I thought I recognized you from
A
many
long
years.
time.
Yeah, it's good to see you, man.
Yeah, good to see you.
So it's funny, you probably knew me when we were Dover Elevator, and then maybe when we were Thyssen Elevator, ThyssenKrupp Elevator. Now it's called TK Elevator.
All of those early phases I did
Yeah.
did know you. Now the most recent one, no, but you never know when the next opportunity is going to be.
Yeah. So same paycheck for 36 years and 3 different company names. So it's been interesting.
That's some longevity.
Yeah.
The company before that just made stone staircases. It wasn't even an elevator.
I think I have everyone beat with 42 years of raised access floor. So proud of myself.
I'm very impressed.
Thank you. I meant to impress you.
We'll just give it a couple of more minutes because everyone is still joining. Mitch, are you there?
I'm here.
Yay.
There he is.
There he is.
A lot of familiar faces. A lot of people afraid to show their faces.
Mitch, how are you?
I'm really well, Brian. Thank you. Oh, Antonio, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, you guys are one over the other. I saw the green light flash up, so
Yeah. How are you, Mitch?
terrific. Terrific.
You haven't left New Jersey, Mitch, huh?
I was gonna say.
Hell no. Couple weeks. I tell you, I'm waiting. I get my second shot on Tuesday, and then whatever the incubation period for that is, I think it's like 10 days.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna damn the torpedoes, full steam ahead. I'm going back into the city and living the life of Riley.
I got my second shot about 5 weeks ago. Hasn't changed. City's still closed.
Can anybody hear James Emden?
Yes, sir.
We all hear you.
We can.
Okay.
Hi, James.
I am new, so I'm introducing myself, James Emden of Helmsley Spear here in New York. A pleasure.
Pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, a pleasure. And I just spoke a little while ago with Mitch. We had a nice 30-minute call.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and Peter's on the call somewhere.
Yeah,
Yes, I'm up here as well. So nice to meet all.
Oh, there you are.
Okay, so
The
we're
problem
on.
is every time somebody joins, the whole screen like moves around. So where I thought you were, you're gone. So
Okay, well.
that's a good problem to have, I guess.
I agree 100%. No question at this point. So pleasure to be part of it.
Okay, so it's nearly 1:05, so maybe we'll get started. Mitch, do you want to welcome everyone?
Well, just as usual, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome, I guess, to our second installment this year. And it's, I want to thank all of you for your time, and thank you for our sponsors and our members. And more importantly, thank you to Hunter Roberts for sponsoring and being the sort of the prime focus of today's event. And I won't belabor it any longer though. I look forward to hearing from all my friends over there because I recognize all of them. And they have been a very key component of this organization from the get-go. So, and I thank you, Hunter Roberts, for that. And Nancy?
Yeah, that's right, Mitch. They, as a founding member, they played a big role in the creation and the development of this organization. So we're really grateful for that. And to those of you who don't know us, Mitch and I basically lead the New York City Builds Bio Plus organization. This is our first monthly member spotlight and networking event. It's a new event that we're introducing this year to really highlight our members and give more opportunity for all of us to get together and talk to each other and see each other, even if it's only over Zoom, in a time when most of us are still very much separated. So this is great to be together. I think everybody's been enjoying these kind of networking sessions after our presentations are over. So thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. As I said, Hunter Roberts is a founding member of NYC Builds Bio and has been a leader in the development of the New York City Life Science Cluster since the early 2000s. Brian and I worked together on the East River Science Project, which is now Alexandria Life Sciences Center. So that's how far back he goes. But from the New York Genome Center, the New York Stem Cell Foundation, BioBat, Northwell, SFAM Core Labs, and Northwell Health Infectious Disease Laboratory, the New York Structural Biology Center, Memorial Sloan Kettering Laboratory Medicine Building, wet labs for the Icahn School of Medicine in Mount Sinai Health System. They really have delivered some of the most sophisticated projects in life science space in New York City. So we're welcoming Bill Allen, Brian, and Antonio Cabrera, who will tell us all about these projects. But I'd also like to thank the founding and corporate members of NYC Builds Bio, who make all of our programming possible. And many of you are on the call this afternoon. So we really thank you for signing up early this year and for allowing us to start off in such a strong manner, and to all of our new members as well. As Mitch said, this event is part of an ongoing series of online events hosted by NYC Builds Bio, and you can view the series on the website, and you can register for future monthly webinars as they're announced, as well as our monthly member spotlight and networking series, which commences this afternoon. We're also planning monthly virtual tours of the developments occurring throughout New York City subclusters right now, commencing in just a couple of weeks with Deerfield Management's 345 Park Avenue South, called The Cure. A date for that will be announced shortly, but we hope you'll join us for all of this rich programming. In addition to that, we have some new initiatives which will also be announced this year. We'll be working on some bipartisan pieces of legislation pending in Congress that could bring lots of resources to the New York City Life Science Cluster. So more to be announced on that, as well as we'll be hosting some of the mayoral candidates later on in the year to talk about their platforms for continuing the investment in life sciences that the de Blasio administration started. But another way to get involved with NYC Builds Bio is to join a leadership committee. We had our first organization meeting in January with the chairs of those committees, and most of them met in February for the first time. And if time permits this afternoon, We'll hear from the chairs of the leadership committees at the end of the program to basically introduce what they're doing this year. But if you've got questions on that, please feel free to reach out and we'll be happy to connect you with the people that can get you more involved. If anyone's having technical difficulties accessing the Zoom room or other issues, please email info@nycbuildsbio.org or send a notice through the chat button at the bottom of your screen. And since most of you are participating in listening only mode, please submit your questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll open it up for questions at the end of the presentation and answer as many as possible. And then, as is our custom now, at the end of the meeting, we'll have a chance for smaller randomized groups to meet in separate rooms where you can open your videos and microphones to talk to each other, and you can stay as long as you like to get to know each other and share stories. 2020 was a great year for life sciences in New York City. We recapped that at our last membership event in December. And 2021 has started off really strong, not only because, the entire country is getting vaccinated right now. And, one of those vaccines was developed right here in New York City by Pfizer. But last week we heard from the NYC EDC about the recent $38 million investment they made in 4 New York City institutions: Einstein College of Medicine, Rockefeller University, Columbia, and the New York Stem Cell Foundation. That's lots of good news in this challenging time, and we need to press forward. So I'd like to turn it over to Bill Allen, who will introduce Hunter Roberts Construction.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to Nancy and Mitch for that very kind introduction to Hunter Roberts. We appreciate the sentiment, and it's been our privilege to be involved in the group since inception. And what I wanted to do was, myself and Brian Aroni and Antonio Cabrera all work together regularly on life science and healthcare projects, and we wanted to just introduce ourselves and reintroduce the firm, or introduce the firm to some new folks, and really tell you a little bit about ourselves, some of our projects, what we're working on, what's important to us, what we can bring to the wider A&E and client group that are perhaps looking at life science opportunities in the city, in the area. And that's really what we wanted to do. So I thank you for allowing us to do this. It means a lot to us. Thank you. So next slide, please. It's a good shot of the 64th Street Lab, actually, the MSK one. I'll talk a little bit about that later, but for now, this is just a welcome slide. So thank you so much for letting us participate today. So a little bit about myself. 30 years. I'm 30 years in the business. 10 in the UK, 20 here in New York. Really have spent the vast majority of my career in life science and healthcare. Owe much of my success to many of the people who are actually on this call today, believe it or not. I see some of the names, and I owe anything and any small achievement I've made and we've made jointly, and as a firm here at Hunter Roberts, I owe a debt of gratitude to a lot of people who are on this call. So thank you for that. I'm going to let Brian and Antonio introduce themselves also.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Again, my name is Brian Aroni. I'm a Senior Vice President at Hunter Roberts. I've been here in New York building for the last 38 years now, which seems to have flown by. And a lot of that time has been spent with members of people that are on this phone call, as Bill said as well. So I've started building laboratories around New York close to 30 years ago now. So I've had a lot of different types of involvement with life science developments, from ground up construction way back when, the FDA lab in Jamaica, and NYU Smilo project, the East River project, and then moving into my career at Hunter Roberts, we've had a lot of interior fit out work and transitional type life science space within existing commercial spaces. But at the same time of doing all of that, I've been lucky enough to be involved with many other projects. There's a picture here of Pier 55, the little island job on the Hudson River, which most of you have hopefully seen as you've traveled around New York, which is something I've been working on for a lot of years now, and we're about to open. So it's a pretty exciting time for that particular project. But, you know, many of the milestones in my career have been with life science developments. And we think that the New York Genome Center is, you know, with a project that we've worked with Nancy on extensively, is really one of the crown jewels of the jobs that we've done. It's a beautiful project and one we're very proud of. So we're going to talk a lot more about life science development and what that brings to the table. But I just wanted to give you a little background to who I am and what I've been doing. So, Antonio.
Thanks, Brian. So for those who don't know me, my name is Antonio Cabrera. I'm a project executive here with Hunter Roberts. I too have done a fair amount of life science work, both with Hunter Roberts and with the previous company. My introduction to life science was actually in the late 2000s. I was a senior project manager for the MEPs doing a 450,000 square foot new build out for Mount Sinai. 5 stories of wet labs, a vivarium level, a micro data center, and I can't remember how many, you know, CTs and MRIs and Linux we had. So, you know, Mount Sinai really did trust us, and they still do trust us now, which is great. But this was a hell of an introduction into the life sciences world, and I'm actually thankful to Mitch and JB&B for being easy on me back then. There was a lot to learn, and their team certainly brought me along. And I just want to give one little shout out here. You can kind of see the picture on the top right there. That's a build out over at Biobat. Brian actually did some big infrastructure work there years back. I came along and more recently did some minor infrastructure work there, as well as a fit out that's ready for tenants. So it's a great job, great client. That job was actually with NK Architects and KL Engineering, really solid project team. And I'll pass it back over to you, Bill.
Next slide, please. Okay, a little bit about the company. Hunter Roberts, founded in 2005, so 16 years. I've been here for half of that period. We are a privately held, privately owned firm. Makes us a little bit unique amongst our competitors, but just an interesting tidbit there. Strong financially. We very good capital, working capital, bonding capacity of 1.5 billion. Last 5 years we've done about $1 billion every year in work in place construction, and we've completed well over 1,400 projects in that period of time, in that 16 years. So, you know, life science makes up a reasonable percentage of the work that we've done over the years and continues to be a big focus for us as a firm. And I think Nancy's right. I certainly share her optimism for this year moving forward. I think there's going to be a lot of great opportunities for all of us. And so I'm looking forward. It's quite exciting. Looking forward to getting stuck into some of that stuff. So next slide, please. So one of the things that Brian's going to really talk here with Antonio, but what I really wanted to put this up here was because, you know, we get involved in many different types of projects, but particularly life science projects very early in the process. And there are a number of important issues that folks come to us with, either clients, people looking to reposition a building, or our friends in the A&E community will come to us, and that's a fairly common occurrence for us to be dealing with projects that are somewhat speculative sometimes, and we spend a lot of time doing that. So I'm going to let Brian just touch on a little bit of this, which I think makes our pre-construction effort important for us as a firm.
Sure, thanks, Bill. So we tried to kind of summarize some of the, and I'll call it the pre-construction. This is really a lot of fact finding that's been going on. We've been partnering with a lot of different development groups, different owners, across the 5 boroughs, and as well as Long Island, looking at buildings, existing buildings, and repurposing buildings. So we've been asked repeatedly, and this has occurred dozens of times, to get involved with estimating different options for these types of buildings that could support life science development in the future. So, initially this building assessment evaluation is really, it constitutes a multitude of factors that are being looked at for these types of projects. So when we look at a building and we evaluate floor to floor heights and we evaluate structural floor capacities and natural lights and roof opportunities and vertical, transporting through the building vertically and shaft space that's available for development on lower floors. These all go into an opportunity to try to rate a building and its effectiveness in being able to turn into a life science building. So we've gone through this estimating effort and we've been able to assist developers in determining the amount of money that would be necessary to support in a core and shell type of environment what a life science development would look like. So there's a lot of keys that go into this. These are a lot of important topics that will assist in the development world. Certainly the cash flow forecasting comes into play. We've been able to creatively look at infrastructure rollouts so that we've been able to not necessarily build 100% of the infrastructure on day one, but to phase in certain components of the infrastructure so that the initial outlay of dollars is less. So again, it's working with the developers, understanding, the marketplace, understanding what their concerns are and what their key drivers are, and providing the information that's helpful to them to really paper the projects and understand the viability for life science development. So we've done a lot of these, and we're very well versed. And this is really very early on in the stage. We did this at the New York Genome Center for over a year. We looked at, with Nancy at the time, we personally looked at 50 some odd spaces, and New York Genome looked at over 100 spaces to try to determine the right spot for them ultimately to be located in. And, we wound up finding the right spot and, working our way then into pre-construction and the actual construction of the space, which we'll talk about in a minute. So, this has got a lot of success behind it, but there's also a lot of good information that's available for the, industry partners that we have.
Thank you, Brian. Next, want to move to the next slide, please. So a little bit about, so Brian's talked there about our pre-construction services, right? So pre-construction group at Hunter Roberts is a big group. It's well staffed. It's full of, a lot of industry veterans in there. I mean, pre-construction for us it's not a huge driven profit center for us. I mean, it's always nice to get paid for anything you're doing and using the expertise of your staff and your people, but for us, it's not a big driver in terms of profit center. It's really an investment. We look at it as an investment in the future and developing those clients and those relationships up front. We're lucky that we have an ownership here that supports that for us, and we're able to really excel in giving advice up front in pre-construction. So that matters. It's a bit of a differentiator for us. Next slide, please. Our construction services really are this is just a slide we had up here for, obviously that's part of what we offer also. No different than any other CM that's in the marketplace in life sciences. And we, on the next page, if you can turn to the next page, what I really wanted to show you was what matters is the clients that we have. And many of these clients are repeat clients.
Yeah,
some of them we've had since early on in our inception, 16 years. And we continue to develop those clients, and we look forward to many more opportunities from them. But the relationships are the most important things for us, for sure. Next page, please. And this is really what our construction group is about, right? So you got to have people that have done it before and have the experience. And as Antonio and Brian were talking about, right, their joint experience, they're going to talk to you about some of their projects. These are many of the team members that they've worked with and continue to work with every day on many of our projects. And I always just like to show this slide because some of you may recognize the rogues gallery here of construction folks. It's always nice to see the faces. Next slide, please. Right, I'll hand it to Brian.
So we wanted to give you a little bit more background and try to use a few projects as examples of successful work that we've done. So the New York Genome Center, again, a job that we're very proud of. This was a project that, as I said earlier, you know, we really worked for well over a year in trying to find the right location for the New York Genome Center. And then once we found the spot, you know, we got involved we were involved with the early development and the design and the coordination to make sure that, you know, we were well positioned to make that job a success when we were able to get out in the field. So the job, there's some pictures here, you know, some renderings, and then the actual picture, it was and let's go to the next page. It was 165,000 square feet of space. It included 2 full lab floors, 2 full office floors, as well as a shelled floor. And this was an office building, a concrete office building that we put the Genome Center in. So it was not the traditional steel framed project that you would see typically. So this required a number of make-ready kind of structural efforts for us to be able to house the Genome Center. We were required to put a topping slab in, a structural topping slab, in order to support some of the live loads and lab loads that we had on the floor. So that was part of the early stage work that we did. We also, architecturally, they chose to expose a number of the ceilings, including some of the lab ceilings. So we were required to do an acoustical treatment of the floor areas, you know, underside slab areas. So that was also part of the challenge. And then, you know, once the floors were prepped, there's a significant amount of mechanical work that happens above the ceiling. You know, unlike typical office spaces, a life science development, you know, the heart of the job is above the ceilings. And to be able to coordinate those properly, get all that mechanical work to fit properly, maintain ceiling heights is really the critical piece of a job success, you know, for this type of a job. So, you know, we were able to do that. You see in the lower left-hand corner, we had overhead service panels for this particular job, the method of distributing all of the mechanical elements, the gases, you know, all of the different types of electrical work that we had all occurred in these overhead service panels on top of the casework lines. So again, there's a lot of coordination with that. There's a lot of purchasing, planning, and efforts that are necessary to make that come along smoothly. But obviously, the lower right-hand corner, you're seeing the end result, you know, of nice, clean ceiling areas and clean casework lines. And it really was, you know, a combination of great teamwork there. We had a terrific design team. And we were able to really work collaboratively to solve all the issues that we had. And it's obviously a beautiful space and a very successfully, you know, handed over space. And I think we had a lot of happy people at the end of the job. People were excited. And it's a job that we're, like we said, extremely proud of. So shortly after the Genome Center, which is close to 10 years ago now, which is hard to believe, but, you know, I think it's about 9 years total, but we also then began work on the New York Stem Cell Foundation, which was another interiors job at 619 West 54th Street. If you turn the page, advance it. So this was similar in some ways to Genome. It was obviously a smaller development, but it was an office building, a very heavy concrete structure. You see that the column line spacing here was a lot tighter. The capitals on top of the concrete structure caused a lot of headaches in our mechanical coordination. We had a lot of existing piping in the ceilings of the floors that we were working on that we had to work around. So there were a lot of challenges, mainly because of the smaller space. But in that smaller space throughout the building, we had to add the services that were necessary to support the stem cell build out. So we had boilers in the basement. We had a chiller up at the roof. We had fume and exhaust fans at the upper roof area. We had an ability to get vertical through the building in order to connect all this mechanical work. We had a major electrical service upgrade that we had to run through the building. So it really requires you to touch so many aspects and so many areas of the building. You know, it's a very intrusive effort, but again, you know, with good coordination and working with the building, it's successfully able to be, you know, completed. And obviously, if you look at this middle picture here, you know, it really came out as a, you know, as a beautiful design and really a well-received end product. If we go to the next slide, right. So this was, like I said, you know, what we looked at the day we got there. A lot of open space, a lot of, you know, this was a heavy structural building. So we had no issues there with structural capacity of the floor slabs. We didn't need to do any type of, you know, upgrades there. But when we were able to support open office, we were able to support what they call the common space downstairs as they're gathering. And it really was, again, a very successful outcome and a pretty typical upgrade to an existing office building. And this building has subsequently had a number of other lab spaces built in it, and it's become a bit of a hub on the west side now. So it's been a success story from an overall building perspective, but Stem Cell Foundation was the first kind of visitor and, you know, the first tenant here to have created that space. So we were, again, excited to have been a part of this. You know, we're currently starting a large job for Mount Sinai, right next door to 619 West 54th Street. It's a 100,000 gross square foot laboratory fit out job. Again, similar to these two jobs with a big infrastructure package to allow this office building to support life science. So we're excited about that job as well. And, you know, we're going to talk about a few other jobs as well, some ground up jobs that we've been involved with. So Antonio, I think you've got a couple to talk about.
Yeah, so if you go to the next slide. So this is a project we did with Northwell Health in Long Island, just over the Queens border. It's 115,000 square foot fit out in their CFAM building, the Center for Advanced Medicine, they call it. This is actually one of the largest automation labs in the country. And actually, right now it's the largest, and I'm sure it's only a matter of time before someone else builds something a little bigger. The manufacturer was Roche. And it's just, you know, we talk about the building components. Working with these manufacturers is also a very concentrated effort. A lot of coordination with their equipment, the power requirements, the drain locations, the humidity sensitivity. They were great to work with, and it was a great team. And obviously, I mean, it goes to show there's a lot of MEP infrastructure that goes with these types of projects. This one specifically was entirely on emergency power with 50% UPS backup. So the generator, which you can kind of see in the upper right-hand side there, it's hard to tell, but that's 2,500 kW. I'm sorry, kW. It's a 2.5 megawatt generator with an acoustic enclosure and an integral tank. It's absolutely enormous. It's almost 2 stories tall and about 50 feet long. It was actually so big that the town we were in wanted to classify that as its own building. So a lot of challenges just jurisdictionally to get that approved. This project as well, you know, standalone air handling units, chillers, boilers. But, you know, a significant challenge with this project specifically is that it's also an adaptive reuse type fit out. So this building was actually home to the old UN. And before that, it was a warehouse for Grumman during World War II. Surprisingly, the structure wasn't meant to handle a lot of the rooftop equipment. So there was a pretty, you know, there's a lot of work to deal with all the overhead mechanicals and reinforcement of the steel. And the soil, which I guess is more believable, was actually contaminated. So a lot of coordination as well with the DEP to do extensive excavation for all the underside plumbing and the acid neutralization tanks that we had to do there. This project, we finished it in summer of 2018. So they've been up and running for a little while now. And actually back in spring of last year, this was one of the biggest testing facilities for COVID-19 in our area. If you go to the next slide. So concurrent to this fit out, we were also doing a new 50,000 square foot infectious disease lab with Northwell. And it was a new build, right? And it's a really great building, really good looking building. You can kind of see on the top right side there, the facade was a combination of metal panels and precast and 2 different types of curtain wall systems and terracotta. And even with all these components just, meshing together, it was still easier to build than a lot of these adaptive reuse projects that we tend to get ourselves into with life science buildouts. And this building had all the bells and whistles. And it's not just the new infrastructure with, again, the units and the boilers and the generators and the UPS. There was actually a lot of controls associated with this, with the energy conservation, integrating the sunlight and temperatures with both the BMS and the lighting control system. This project, it also included a BSL-3 type space. So, it actually, and it had the infrastructure to be converted to a BSL-4. So there's a lot of quality control that goes into making this space work correctly. Pressurization of the lab and the antigens is critical. I mean, you really have to do thorough testing and commissioning with these spaces to get the tracking and pairing correct. And it's just a lot of opening and closing of the anteroom doors to make sure that you can fine tune the system. This is actually where they're doing a lot of testing for TB. TB is tuberculosis. And, I can assure you, after they went live, we did not perform any day 2 work in this space. This project was also completed in the summer of 2018. And really, I just want to say, thank you to Northwell for entrusting us to build both of these very complex projects together. And both of these projects, FLAD were the architects and WSP were the engineers. And they did a great job. Our teams really worked and meshed very well together, and they provided a ton of support for us to make these buildings, what they are today. And I think, Bill, you want to talk about a few more projects as well?
Yeah, if you go into the next slide, please. So Brian talked about new buildings and ground up. So this is really a bit of a flagship for clinical laboratories. MSK, it's been a long-time client for Hunter Roberts, entrusted us with building this lab for them on 64th Street. It's a tremendous project for us. Had quite a few complexities, big demolition package, 40 or 50 feet of rock excavation to create 2 floors below grade. Steel structure, concrete on deck, big infrastructure inside the building, a lot of unique transportation requirements. They had what they called I think it was like a vertical transportation system that they have in there for samples and that type of stuff that can go quickly from one floor to the next and up through the building, and just increases efficiency. So this is a big successful job for us. We did it with Perkins and Will and JFK&M, and Selman did the structure. Look, it's worked for MSK, right? They had a lot of their blood and tissue sampling and testing was being done in disparate parts of the counties all around the boroughs, I should say, sorry. And they really wanted to centralize everything into one place. So I think they do something in the region of 25,000 clinical lab tests in this building every day. And it runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so it's been a game changer for MSK, according to them. I'm not making that up. They told us that it's really changed things for them in terms of their efficiency and how quickly they can get things done. And it's also freed up some other spaces for them, which were primarily used previously as labs in different buildings all around, and they've sort of centralized everything here. So this was a great project for us. We were involved early on too, which was nice. And I think that concludes for us, unless we have something after this one. I can't remember. No, so thank you, just to say thank you very much. And we'll take, if there's any questions, perhaps, you could, well, Nancy usually does a good job of moderating that. So if there are any questions that anybody has, for Brian or Antonio, we'd be happy to take them, for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, all of you. I mean, those were really, really impressive projects. And I guess I'm struck by, the sophistication of the projects and the fact that most of them were for academic centers in New York City. And I wonder if you could comment on the difference between, working in the academic environment and actually creating a commercial life science center.
Okay, I'm going to maybe let Brian touch on that one if he's.
I mean,
he's contemplating there.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with a number of academic institutions over the years in laboratory development. I think from a commercial development perspective, the budget at times becomes more of a driver than it does with some of the other, institutions. That's not a golden rule, but it seems to have been something that, has come to the forefront in the discussions with the development community. There's much more of a focus. And then the return on investment, obviously, in that world, is a much greater focus. So I think that would be the first kind of response I would have. I think the components of the building, I think they're relatively similar. They can change, again, depending upon the institution you're talking about. But I think, I think some of our design team members, certainly Mitch, I'm sure, has an opinion on how he sees the design of each of those elements. But that would be my main comment, would be the budget focus.
I think the location too, Brian, right? That changes too, depending on, the more a commercial client is more likely to perhaps not be so driven by being close to, if it's an institutional client, they might, a lot of times they want to be, in close to their local campus or one of their campuses. Sometimes that can be a driver too for institutional clients.
And just to add to that, some of the commercial applications we've done, they're very specific to the tenant, which really makes the construction process easier. A lot of these larger projects for larger institutions, they try and build one lab to accommodate multiple research, multiple components, multiple physicians coming in, right? So it's very flexible, right? Again, you have service panels that we've all done that have all of your med gases, all of your different power requirements, and that may not be necessary depending on the user. So those tend to sometimes lead to changes or even just keeping things very broad. So the commercial aspect, we've actually been able to keep those prices a little down, as well as be a little more aggressive with those construction schedules.
Yeah, and Brian, you mentioned that, especially in the planning stages, figuring out when the investment gets made and how it can be basically layered in, so you don't have to make that investment right up front. That's probably more important in a commercial approach than the academic approach, right?
Yeah, and I think in the academic approach, they know who's moving into that space. They know who's going to be the tenants there. They know which scientists they're moving in. They know who and why they're building that space. There's obviously a need for that space. On the commercial side, we've had many partners there that don't know who's moving in. This is purely speculative. So the outlay of money becomes a much greater issue, because when they're going to see that money coming back to them in lease payments, there's an unknown to that. So layering in those costs to limit that upfront cost becomes that much more critical.
Right. So we had a question here from Ed Glickman. How typical is the inclusion of BSL-3 into commercial space? And I think that's indicative of the commercial approach, right? They're basically creating space that's equipped with certain systems to support scientific endeavor, but not necessarily at the depth that the academic medical centers are.
Right, that's clearly a specialized type of space. So you would need an individual who required that for their research or their testing and such. So, you know, that's a small subset of the people that are out there in this environment. So you wouldn't, as I think Mitch answered on the question, it's not very common for us to see that in a commercial type endeavor.
Yeah. So Jim Holland just had a question, and this is interesting because last week we heard from the Einstein College of Medicine that they're building GMP manufacturing capability for cell manufacturers in their facility. And he's asking, do these space support small manufacturing pilot plants, et cetera? And I'm thinking traditionally not, but as the science increasingly turns toward, the manufacture of personalized therapeutic approaches, you need that kind of capability nearby your clinical space, right?
Yeah, for instance, in the Stem Cell Foundation, we built in a future GMP facility. So they had actually allocated the size and the space. They left it as a storage room for the initial phase of occupancy, but it was outfitted with the mechanical requirements stubbed into that space so that those connections could be made more easily in the future. So they looked at that GMP facility as a year or 2 or 3 down the road, not an initial requirement of their occupancy, but they did have the foresight to incorporate the future needs so that the inclusion of that space later on would be that much simpler. So they limited the amount of impact it would have in introducing that into the space.
Yeah, and we don't have a lot of biological manufacturing space in the city, but you created the capability for some of that at BioBat, is that right?
So actually, we did recently a fit out not too long ago where it was a larger fit out, but it had the future possibilities to separate it into smaller manufacturing ports. And so, yeah, we did do that. And really, it was all about the separation of the HVAC system and how we can separate each area by what their function is and what they need simply by putting a partition and adjusting the BMS system.
And Brian, you want to comment on BioBat?
When we first got involved with BioBat, my involvement there was a number of years ago when we upgraded, a portion of that building, as Antonio said, from the infrastructure perspective to support laboratory development. So it really was the initial phase of core and shell upgrades. The interior fit out piece, we did a very small piece of a lab as, kind of a mock-up component. And then the intent on their part was to layer in the actual fit out work later on, which they subsequently did once tenants started coming into that space. But my involvement there was earlier on, and it was really from an infrastructure perspective.
Oh, okay. Great. Do we have any other questions? Mitch, do you have any comments? You've been involved with a lot of these jobs. Oh, are you muted?
I'm in the mute game.
No, I was muted and I'm trying to figure out how to unmute. Nothing to add. It's having done both the clinical and academic as well as the private stuff, they have a lot in common. I think one of the things that Hunter Roberts brought to the table was the fact that they do both. From a design standpoint, we've seen a significant difference in the approach. Academic institutions want to invest everything up front when they have the money, and they will pre-invest in future flexibility. And the commercial side, not so much. But at the end of the day, they are all equally challenging, to say the least.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, we can finish up a little early and drop into our networking rooms if there are no other questions. Oh, Kathleen. Kathleen, do you want to unmute yourself and just talk about BioBat a little bit?
Well, I just want to say how great the work that Hunter Roberts has done, and we're going to be, coming back to them again, hopefully within the next 6 months with another RFP. But I just wanted to say that the manufacturing has been put in place. We have 2 clean rooms now in the space, and it's all leased up. So we're looking forward to our next project.
And Kathleen, just identify yourself so everyone knows who you are.
So I'm Kathleen Otto, I'm the Executive Director of BioVet.
Okay, great. Thank you. Are there any other questions? We can drop into networking if there are, because I don't see a lot of the chairs of the leadership committee don't appear to be on the call this afternoon. So maybe we'll have a report from them in our next monthly meeting.
I had a quick comment / question. So I'm Mike Grinchpon from Schneider Electric. We've done a lot of the projects that have been talked about today, you know, ERSP, MSK 64th Street, Mount Sinai, BioBat. I was actually personally involved with the programming of the BioBat BMS system, but, you know, that was in my previous role. So my question is, you know, it was kind of answered by Mitch in a way, but with these customers, what is the expectation for the longevity for these particular fit outs or even greenfield sites? Because, you know, from what, you know, Schneider Electric does, we have a lot of, you know, infrastructure type services, you know, building management systems, energy management system, things like that. And those have a life cycle of like 15 to 20 years. And to kind of, you know, achieve the goals of, you know, sustainability, energy management, things like that. And it kind of takes like an integrated design approach where it, you know, just by the fact of that approach makes the CapEx a little bit more expensive. And, you know, that might, you know, change a customer's idea of what they really want in terms of building management, energy management, things like that. So what is the normal life cycle? I mean, maybe your customers aren't really upfront with that, but in your experience, what have you seen?
We're going to let Mitch answer that for us.
Sure. You know, and
Shift the hot seat, Brian.
no, it's not the hot seat. I'm sitting here in my command console and everything's ringing at the same time. So Mike, that's a good question. So the key is that the infrastructure that we develop for a project, for profit tenant landlord condition, that infrastructure has to follow the logic that you prescribe, which it's got to be looking forward. You know, can we do it in a way that's sustainable? Can we do it in a way that's economic? But also, can we do it in a way that's scalable, so that we don't invest more than we absolutely have to meet the requirements of the tenants that are certainly on the horizon, but yet have the ability to upgrade that infrastructure, whatever it is, to accommodate the changes in the future without pre-investing. And that's what I was alluding to before, that in institutional clients, they tend to pre-invest because they don't want to have to go back and make changes or add, so they're willing to put money up front in flexibility and capacity, even though they don't have a justification for it day one. So the challenge for us as designers, and the challenges for us, advising our clients that are doing this for life science on a private development side, is what's the minimum amount of investment you need to do to make it flexible enough that you can accommodate 80% of the occupants without over designing and investing in a lot of stuff that may or may not be necessary. So the key is to be scalable, but not necessarily invest it all in day one. Does that make sense?
Yes, makes sense. Thank you.
Great. Okay, Carolina, do you want to put us into our discussion rooms?